Okay, I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show Garry Kasparov, who was the youngest world chess champion in history in 1985 at the age of 22, and he retired from professional chess in 2005 after a record 20 years as the world's top-ranked player. After that, though, he didn't slow down at all, and he took up the Russian pro-democracy movement against the regime of Vladimir Putin, and his newest book, which I have just finished and I highly recommend, is called Winter is Coming: Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped. Garry, a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I'd like to break this discussion into two halves. The first one focusing on what's going on in Russia, and then actually talking about the investment side of it. So using your chess player's strategic mind, you've written Winter is Coming, which is a very, very harsh critique of the Putin regime. And yet from outside, it appears that Russians love him. You know, everything we see on the outside makes it look good. So how can people like me, who don't know the tactics of the chessboard of Russian politics, really know what to believe?
First of all, there is no politics in Russia as such, because the moment you say politics, people in Israel, in America, in Europe, they immediately think about registering political parties, campaigning, debating, having elections. Russia today is a full-blown one-man dictatorship. It's Vladimir Putin who makes all the decisions, and of course, you know, as in every dictatorship, officially everybody's in love with a dictator. You know, Germans love Hitler, Soviets love Stalin, and I'm sure North Koreans, all of them officially love Kim Jong-un, whatever the name of the family dictator is now. But we should look at the real life in Russia, and you don't have to be an expert in so-called Russian politics. You can simply look at the economic data. The economic conditions have been steadily deteriorating. When you look at the Russian budget, despite of all these problems, recent problems with Russian finances due to the drastic drop of the oil prices, Putin's regime keeps spending money on military, on security apparatus, and on propaganda machine. It's a typical war budget, and you know, as it happened with every dictator before, he could be laughed on Sunday night, but Monday morning could be very different.
So when we get that information, I think as you're describing as a dictator, he controls the media. He's in charge of it. But today, with the ubiquitous social media platforms, it's kind of unlimited the way people can communicate. Is that not getting out to the West?
Yeah, by the way, I think it's a common misunderstanding about the importance of social media for political purposes. Even in the United States, was probably the highest, rate of the access to internet and to social media. Still, television plays much larger role in promoting political causes. People looking at the debates on the big screen, and while social media is getting bigger and bigger space, television is on top, even in the United States, even in Europe. Now, as for Russia, we have, let's say, 100 million people out of 140, and that's probably an exaggeration, with access to internet. But typically, of this crowd uses internet for social and cultural exchange, for social media, for advertising, for buying and selling, and only 10%, if not less, look at internet in a search for political news. And we have to, admit the fact that Kremlin built a very sophisticated presence on internet, famous, troll factories that are all over the place, trying to suppress anti-Putin activities there. And I would say that out of these 10 million people in Russia who are potentially, looking for political news on the internet, at least 8 million have been caught by the Kremlin-controlled website. So we're ending up with a relatively small amount of people who could, learn about the situation in Russia from alternative sources. But even for them, it's quite difficult to live in an atmosphere, a very poisonous atmosphere of Putin's propaganda machine. Because my mother, who is 78, who still lives in Moscow and who was born under Stalin, and she saw and heard everything during the Soviet years, she tells me that while Soviet propaganda had some kind of, positive future, bright future ahead of us, we're making sacrifices today, but tomorrow we'll all, benefit from because we're working for the common good. Putin's propaganda machine is selling only the cult of death. It's about conflict. It's about war. It's about confrontation. It's about enemies. And Putin is very good in creating enemies because as long as Russia, according to his propaganda machine, is surrounded by enemies, Putin is indispensable. He is Putin the Great, who is the only protector of Russia from these endless enemies.
Well, we certainly see that the dictators like to have an external enemy in order to bring people together to support them. We're talking with Garry Kasparov, who is probably the greatest chess player in history. He has left the chess world in order to take up the pro-democracy fight in Russia, and he's taken on a very big competitor in the form of Vladimir Putin, the president or prime minister or whatever he is today. Garry, you're talking about the power. And from an outsider, and again, I apologize because as an outsider, I definitely see this differently from you. And outsiders look at a guy like Putin and say he's tough and he's determined and he gets what he wants. And let's say you're an investor. You say I could invest in the United States, where it's a very weak government and a very weak president, and who knows which way they're going. Or I could invest in Russia with a real powerhouse. What would you say to someone who's making that decision?
Oh, if you have money to waste, you're welcome. I'm sure, Putin's cronies are waiting for you or anyone else to come in. Because you mentioned America with a weak president, and I couldn't agree more. He's almost non-existing. But by the way, inside America, he's always backing tough regulations that making business more and more difficult. But as for Russia, it's unlike the United States or Europe or Israel. There are no rules that could protect your investment. So it's not about one person. It's about the strength of the institutions. In Putin's Russia, institutions, all institutions, whether it's about the judicial system, whether it's about parliament, whether it's about press, it's all have been destroyed and put just in one unit serving the interests of Vladimir Putin. In Putin's Russia, he represents the country. And as, again, it happened before. Hitler was Germany, Stalin was the Soviet Union, Mao Zedong was China. And it looked for a while, it always looked as a dictator could get anything he wanted. But eventually, they all crossed, the ultimate red line. And it seems to me, again, reading the news from Russia, again, following the same official news about protests now of the drivers of the long-haul tracks that are being robbed by a new tax imposed to benefit one of the Putin's closest friends, and about all the cuts, in social security, in healthcare, in culture, in education. And, military expenditure going up, and Russia's being stretched, from Ukraine to Syria, and, creating new enemies, like, Turkey suddenly out of the blue became, number one enemy on Russian television. There are too many conflicts, and I think that even for Putin's, all-powerful magic inside Russia, I think it's a bit too much. So that's why, as with every dictator, we know that he collapses all of a sudden. He looks very, very strong, but from outside. But there's so many problems inside that nobody can anticipate because we don't have, elections or proper institutions to measure the public malcontent.
Given the rather negative view that you're describing, and certainly in your book, it seems to be akin to just a mafia. Are there any opportunities in honest, non-corrupt Russia, or is it just across the board? There's no chance, which is why you titled your book "Winter is Coming."
No, but let's not forget. This you have winter, but then in theory we should have spring. And as for the future of Russia, I believe that there is a future, and Russia, could be a normal democratic country, joining the family of civilized nations. Let's not forget, there's no predetermined genetic parents to dictatorships. You look at North Korea and you think that Koreans all are just born to be part of this dictatorial state, but the South Korea is a flourishing market economy and stable democracy. So the real challenge for Russia will be the transition period. And the longer Putin stays in power, a dry the desert, political desert that he created will be. So that's why if somebody from outside thinks that for Putin staying in power offers stability in Russia. It's not a stability, the stability of the graveyard. And sooner we can, get rid of this dictator, better the chance of Russia to survive as one state in the 21st century.
But there was a transition period. Russia really was moving, as a result of Ronald Reagan, to what seemed from the outside, again, to be a truly democratic system, to bring in capitalism and all. What happened? Why couldn't they sustain it?
I could tell your listeners just simply read the book, because I spent a lot of time and pages in the book, explaining that. And it's good that you brought Ronald Reagan, because it's starting from the beginning of the Cold War, and from Harry Truman to Ronald Reagan, there was a consistent foreign policy with minor modifications, but within the range when the administration changed in the United States. And this policy helped to contain communism and then to defeat it. But since the end of the Cold War, we could see that American foreign policy worked more like a pendulum, swinging from one side to another. Bill Clinton did very little, Bush did too much, and Obama has been doing nothing. And it's very important that we'll see America restoring its leadership role and coming up with a comprehensive foreign policy that could address the most important issues that we're dealing with. And, of course, many of these problems are very close to Israeli borders.
Yeah, that certainly does worry us. We're nearing the end of our time, but I believe a lot of Russians, maybe Russian expatriates, listen to the show and do follow what you're doing. If you could leave them with one thing to do now to help the cause, what would you like them to do?
No, I don't think that there's very much we can do right now, because it's still the change should come from outside. But it's very important that people in Russia will no longer see Putin as an invincible leader. Well, as we know from the history of the Soviet Union, Afghanistan played a crucial role in weakening the sort of all-powerful image of Soviet regime. Putin needs to be defeated geopolitically. And, for instance, the collapse of Assad's regime in Syria that Putin wants to protect so badly, that could be one of the signals for Russians that it's time to go after our own dictator. And, of course, I welcome everybody to look at Kasparov.com and to join my Twitter and Facebook, because I'm regularly, making comments of these events. And, I still believe that the day will come when many of us who are now forced to live in exile, they will be able to contribute for the future of our country.
Okay, Garry, we will put links to those at the show notes at goldsteinongelt.com. Is there any other website or other information you'd like us to put there?
No, it's every piece of vital information is there on Kasparov.com, and of course I recommend people to look at the book. It's not in Hebrew, but it's in almost all languages except Russian, of course. Unfortunately, yes. And it's it is very important for people to recognize the true nature of Putin's regime and the real danger of this regime for the world, because it's too easy to be trapped by the current threats that are coming from the Islamic State or other terrorist and radical groups all over the place, without recognizing that, as I said in the book, there's a capo di tutti capi, boss of bosses, and he's in Moscow, and as long as he's there, he will keep stoking conflicts and chaos.
All right, so we will watch for the future and hope that spring comes very quickly. Garry Kasparov, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.